They say that when you die, you can't take anything with you. You leave this world as naked as the day you were born. Not me. The day I was born, I arrived wrapped in layer upon layer of historical trauma, swaddled in generational grief, pressed beneath a home heavy with dogma, and sealed in with rigid expectations I never consented to. I grew up in an adobe house with a dirt floor. It taught me humility. And life taught me I was inferior. I never knew what it felt like to wear something new. Every shirt I owned came from a garbage bag of hand-me-downs brought by older church ladies, like the trauma passed down from my parents' own broken childhoods. The clothes never quite fit, but we wore them anyway. Spare the rod, spoil the child. Wasn't just a saying in our home, it was doctrine. Apparently, that included breaking your child's spirit with the same sharp tongue you used to cry out to God on Sunday. And in a house like ours, bad days weren't occasional. They were the atmosphere. I remember the bruises on my mom's legs, wordless warnings that women who speak pay a price. Church wasn't just a ritual. It was a mandate, a weekly reminder of my unworthiness, my sinful nature, my supposed destiny to burn in hell unless I repented. Not just once, constantly, repeatedly. Repent, recognize, repeat. Salvation, they said, only came in death. And if you were too late, well, there was even a hymn for that. A sorrowful little song that mocked the soul left behind. What kind of twisted mind writes a lullaby about damnation? Always moving, always questioning, the antithesis of what I was supposed to be. My parents did their best to tame me, to mold me into what girls should be. Submissive, obedient, pure. But I was too much. Eres una lombriz, chama. ¿Por qué haces eso? I could never explain. Not because I didn't want to, but because I hadn't yet learned to think before I was reacting. I lived in reactivity, in survival, in defense. Chamaca traviesa, insoportable. Even then, a part of me felt compassion for the adults trying to survive me, trying to squash the very thing that had kept me alive. They didn't know who I was, and to be honest, neither did I. But something in me was refusing to die. Something wild, something ancient, something worth protecting. The book fair came once a year. For most kids, it was a celebration. For me, a reminder that I didn't belong. We never had money for books. And even if I had, my parents would never have let me buy anything outside of the gospel. Secular books were seen as tools of Satanas, little traps designed to plant seeds of doubt and steal your soul. But one year, when I was 8, I somehow convinced my dad to give me $1. The teacher asked who had money for the book fair, and for the first time, I raised my hand. For once, I was one of them, a kid with the means to choose. But my excitement faded fast. $1 didn't go far. All I could afford was a bookmark from a rotating display stand in the corner of the room. I turned it slowly, inspecting each one as if they were competing for my fortune. Then one caught my eye. It was ugly. A faded granny yellow with a little brown teddy bear. It read, "Please be patient. God isn't finished with me yet." In that moment, I experienced an emotional split, a chasm between feeling seen for the first time and an immediate urge to withdraw, to protect whatever had been touched. I didn't tell anyone. I kept the bookmark hidden until I got home, then quietly tucked it between the pages of my little white Bible. From then on, whenever the preacher thundered about hellfire and how defiant children like me would burn for eternity, I would open up my little white Bible to that bookmark and let those words hold me. They became my lifeline. More than a premonition, it became a promise that everything I was and everything I was experiencing held some sacred truth. It wasn't punishment, it was preparation, so that someday I would discover my capacity to save myself. Little by little, my eyes began bringing truth into focus. I started noticing how miserable everyone at church seemed, while the neighbors always welcomed me into their happy home. Meanwhile, I was urged to pray for their lost souls. While our congregation talked about salvation, sang about being overcomers, but lived like victims, stagnant in cycles of enduring and suffering, waiting for someday when the rapture would carry them home and all others would be left behind. When things went well, it was God. Sometimes there were miracles. You were made in His image, they said. God gave you the power. But when things fell apart, it was our fault, our lack of faith, our sinful nature. God gave you free will, they reminded us. You must repent, the time is near. Bad marriages, sickness, depression, toxic families, they were all divine tactics. God's way of bringing us to our knees, testing our faithfulness to Him. You must pray for His hand to liberate you from the darkness. And when tragedy struck despite our obedience, it was God's will. He works in mysterious ways. Somehow, despite all the pain, all the loss, despite 8 billion souls on earth and countless more before, we were the real sons and daughters of God. A superior kind of unworthy sinner, because we had accepted the truth. We were taught to despise the world because we were not of it, while singing God is love and claiming to be filled with His Spirit. Then there was money. God needed our money to build His church. He couldn't show us His faithfulness unless we first show Him our trust, even while living on government assistance. Meanwhile, the ministers drove nice cars, lived in beautiful homes, preached about blessings with greedy accents. Someday we will rejoice in streets of gold, they exclaimed. I don't even like gold. I thought it was tacky. The message confused me, but I was trained not to question it. When I was 13, we went to visit my friend and her family. Her dad asked my father to let me stay with him for a week. He was a minister, so of course my father trusted him. Trusted he was leaving me in good, godly hands. I remember waking up to find him staring at us while we slept. I did everything I could to avoid him. Then one day, he asked me to go on a ride. Said my friend couldn't come. She needed to help her mom with the dishes. We're going to see some people from the church, he said. People who knew me when I was little. It didn't make sense, but I was afraid to say no. See, God gave men authority over women, so when they spoke, you obeyed. Questioning was rebellion, and rebellion was sin. He drove me deep into the mountains, far from any houses, up a desolate road. When he parked, he started talking about the need to keep our little secret. Started monologuing about how he would teach me to be a woman. His vile words sounded far away, drowned out by something that erupted within me at that moment. It wasn't a scream. I didn't cry. It was a force. Something powerful and unshakable created a wall between us. Somehow, I knew he realized I was not going down without a fight. He would have to kill me before he could lay a hand on me. Time stood still, suspended in the threat of his intention. But eventually, he turned the van back on and drove me home in silence. That day I learned, godly men who proclaimed the truth were more twisted than the loving lost ones I'd met outside the church. That was the day that the fire in me began to burn out the fear that had contained me for so long. School was my escape, a portal to a world beyond my house and far, far away from the church. Surrounded by a sea of sinners like me, I could finally breathe. It was a space to think, a space to love, to explore, to question. But even that moment of freedom never came without a fight. Every morning, my mom would stop me in the hallway. ¿A dónde vas? I'm going to school, Mom. Otra vez ya fuiste ayer. You already went yesterday. I have to go every day, Mom. She'd roll her eyes, said it was a waste of time, that I'd benefit more from staying home, learning how to cook and clean for my future husband. I told her I didn't plan on getting married till I was 72. Then it would be for life. It seems part of the middle school experience always involves a bully. Yuri was a kind of girl who would size you up the second you walked into a room and find the one thing she could use to make your life miserable. Your shoes, your hair, the way you held your books. She didn't just tease, she tormented, and it looked like she enjoyed it. I was taught that people like her were endemoniados, full of demons, possessed by the devil himself. They targeted the chosen ones to make us lose our way. But I shouldn't be bothered by revenge against people like that. Rather, I should take to heart that someday she'd pay for her sins, being condemned to a place where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth, while we got to live in joy for all eternity. Freshman year, I failed English. Was there anything worse than having to go to summer school? Yes, there was. Out of 20 failures, guess who else had to take freshman remedial English? Yuri. I was horrified. I sat at the furthest most chair in the class I could find, tucking my head down and avoiding eye contact. Just take it half a day at a time, I decided. When lunch break finally came, I couldn't wait to escape for a while. I only lived about a half mile away, so I could walk home for lunch. As I cut across the empty courtyard, I heard someone call out, "Hey, where are you going?" I turned. Yuri was leaning against the corner of the building. She looked small in contrast with the open lot and empty sidewalks. Home? For lunch? There was something about her posture, her tone, a vulnerability in her eyes I'd never seen that must have caught me off guard. Before I could stop myself, I heard the words coming out of my mouth. "Wanna come?" To my absolute horror, she said, "Okay," and started walking towards me. What the hell had I just done? Why would I invite El Diablo himself to my house? What if he finds out I'm Mexican? Ya me jodí. The walk home became my own torturously silent green mile. She was going to destroy me. I hesitantly trudged through the front door and introduced her to Mama, who had prepared tacos. Yuri shook her hand and said, "Mucho gusto," with a smile. She spoke Spanish and was polite. For the next 10 or 20 minutes, all you could hear was the crunching of tacos and clanking of the forks picking up Mexican rice. She cleaned up her plate when she finished, thanked my mom, and said everything was sabroso. Boy, those demons really know how to put up a front. I held my breath all afternoon, waiting for her to drop the snarky attack when we got back to class. But her demeanor didn't change. I actually saw her crack a hesitant smile for the first time. The next morning, she asked what I was doing for lunch. I invited her to come again. This time, it was intentional, more so out of curiosity. When school started back in the fall, her face lit up when she noticed I shared a class with her. She grabbed her backpack and plopped into a seat right next to me. I found myself bracing at times, wondering what was going on with these demons. Like, what's their policy on possession? Is there like a getting to know you period? But our friendship grew, and we even hung out after school a few times. Then one day, another kid was giving me a hard time, and she let him have it. I had befriended the devil, and I really liked her. Over time, I learned she had lost her mom. Something in me shifted. I didn't know the word trauma yet, but I realized the darkness was solely the result of a light taken by tragedy. I had been taught to demonize pain. I began to question everything I'd been taught. What if mean people were just hurting people? What if the weeping and gnashing of teeth were cries for help from unbearable human experiences? I began to question my loyalty to a deity who would take a child's mother, then condemn her to hell for eternity for the ways in which she expressed her pain. At 16, my friend started dating the pastor's son. She helped care for the pastor's wife until she passed. I don't know when the switch happened, but on her 18th birthday, the pastor took her to the courthouse and married her, behind her parents' back. He was 54. This pedophile pastor stood behind the pulpit justifying his actions as commandments from God. A godly man, he said, needed a pure woman, a clean, submissive woman, a virgin bride. The threat of hell was meant to shape me into such a lady, worthy of being the bride of their savior. But I didn't want to marry that fool. He lacked any desirable qualities. He was jealous, possessive, angry, with an unquenchable ego that demanded constant praise of his greatness, under the threat of eternal damnation. "It's because he loves you," they said. "You must submit to loving him back, or you will burn in hell for all eternity." In that moment, I realized I'd rather burn in hell. If purity was what made me a target for this type of love, then I would make for damn sure I was unworthy. I refused to be claimed. I refused to be controlled. I refused to be chosen. If I only got one life, then I was going to make it mine. I was 19 when I finally broke free. I found out I could go to college if I took out loans, and that meant one thing: I could move out. No permission, no prayers, no waiting on a blessing I'd never received. I remember the first time I wore pants, the first time I put on makeup, the first time I trimmed my long, untouched hair. Each act was electric. Every small rebellion buzzed with holy defiance, a reclamation, a return, not to sin, but to self. I knew my parents would be disappointed, but I didn't care, because it felt like I had finally broken through the cast that had wrapped around my soul since birth, tight enough to nearly crush it. And now I could breathe. I could think. I could finally live. For a long time, I tried to outrun my truth. I felt shame about who I was. I realized over time, the shame wasn't about who I was. It was about who I wasn't. It was about who I was forcing myself to be, incongruent with my truth. I became familiar with the pain of watching a reality crumble, a world constructed not by me, but by the fears, fantasies, and unresolved stories of others who had never dared to find themselves. I stepped away from everything I was told was true, without knowing if anything better was waiting on the other side. I learned to listen to the pull, to feel the fire that fueled me, to learn to trust me. When I became a therapist, I thought I was helping build something for others. I didn't know I was putting together pieces of my own path. That same instinct, the one that once protected me, the fire, the questioning, the refusal to surrender, were the very keys to unlock healing. Not just mine, but others too. I started to understand that all of it, the inner conflict, the trembling fear, the burning questions, the rebellion, the defiance, wasn't debris. It was data. It was direction. The shame, the anger, the seeking, each was a signal, a divine guide pointing inward towards truth buried beneath who I'd been taught to be. There is a knowing that rises when survival gives way to clarity, when the child they try to break becomes the guide, when the fire you feared becomes the flame that lights the path. They say that when you die, you can't take anything with you. You leave the world naked as the day you were born. When I die, I will take with me sacred stories of resilience. My body will be infused with the love I generated, the truth I digested, and the wisdom I embodied. I will carry keepsakes of knowing, souvenirs of becoming. My will shall contain the map for the world's greatest fortune, a life well lived by a freedom reclaimed. I will leave behind a compass for all who seek to remember who they are. I hope they discover the path that is already within them. I hope they will know that a breakdown always precedes a breakthrough. I hope they rise beyond the limits of what they thought was possible and become more than the world ever gave them permission to be. As for me, I will return to love, and there I will remain eternally.